Chapter number 22 of The Greenstone Door by William Satchell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 22, Part 1. Prisoner. Your name, friend? The speaker was a man of between 40 and 50, of a plain but not ill-natured countenance. I had no recollection of having seen him before, and I searched in vain among the 10 or dozen of his followers for a familiar face. I answered him, giving him the name by which I was commonly known among the Ngāti Maniapoto. "It is well," he said. "Waharoa has need of his little finger, therefore have we come to guide you to him." Footnote: this peculiar use of a great father's name when the son was intended is not unusual with the Maoris. Tamihana, the son of Waharoa, is here alluded to. End of footnote. "Alas," I replied, "it is a thing to be regretted that at this time my business is urgent." "True," he agreed phlegmatically, "since it must necessarily wait until the affair of the chief is disposed of." We gazed at one another steadily, with the result, so far as I was concerned, that I recognised this was not a man to be trifled with. "I am, then, your prisoner," I said at last. He made a movement of depreciation. "The pakeha will walk at liberty in our midst," he said. "No hand shall be laid upon him, nor any indignity offered him." I looked round the group and weighed my chances in a rush for liberty. Every man was armed and plainly on the alert. Even if they hesitated to shoot me down, there was little hope of evading such a number in a country all but unknown to me. Nevertheless, a rage of impatience, hard to control, possessed me. "If," I said, "the chief of the Ngāti Hawa can wait 2 days, I will give you my undertaking to visit him at that time." "That cannot be either," replied the leader. "Your coming is already looked for." "Well, my friend," I said bluntly, "I am afraid I must refuse to come." His eye shot a warning signal around his followers, and again returned to me. "The wisdom of the pakeha is in many men's mouths," he said, "but here it is not evident. The command of the chief must be obeyed." He paused, expectant of my answer, and clearly ready for action in the event of a further refusal. To have offered it would have merely involved me in an undignified and futile struggle, and I submitted. "Lead on, then," I said bitterly, "and let us get through with this business as quickly as we may." The leader of the party expressed his satisfaction in my decision, adding that it would be well also that I should deliver up any arms I might be carrying. I told him that I had none, and he accepted the assurance on the instant. At a word of instruction, the party began to advance. 5 or 6 natives went on in front, the leader and myself followed, the remainder of the troop bringing up the rear. Through the bush we moved in single file, but beyond the way was more open, enabling my captor to range up alongside. Meantime my thoughts had been busy, and recognising the futility of a display of ill temper, I resolved to make myself as agreeable as possible. "Are you of the Ngāti Hawa tribe, friend?" I began. "Those with me are of the Ngāti Hawa," he agreed, "but I myself am of the tribe of the Ngāti Maniapoto." "Indeed," I said, wondering, for I had no recollection of his face. "Then I am surprised you should make prisoner one who may claim to be a member of your tribe by adoption." Again he protested against the use of the word prisoner. It was an ill word wherewith to designate my amiable acceptance of Wiremu Tamihana's invitation. "I have been much away from the district, Littlefinger," he continued, "and yet you and I have met before." "Where?" I asked, regarding him more closely. at the runanga of the religions. Remember you that occasion? Ah, but you were fleet of foot and agile as an eel. Few might have escaped from that ordeal. I have many swift runners with me today, he added as an afterthought. They will need their swiftness, friend, I said, unable to resist the opening he gave me, if this quarrel is proceeded with. He accepted the jest with undiminished good humour. The bayonet, he remarked candidly, is a thing to be avoided by persons of sense. The gun is good. The loading, the taking aim, bang, one enemy the less. That is a thing that warms and pleases. But the bayonet, that is not a weapon to be used by Christian peoples. Then what of your tomahawk, friend? I asked, indicating the short-handled, workmanlike tool he carried in his belt. That, he said, is good. Sometimes the gun fails, but one blow of the sharp axe will release a suffering spirit and speed it on its way to Tauranga. One blow does not always content, I said. I have heard that the men of Taranaki struck again and again, till it was difficult to distinguish one dead man from another. It may be so, said he, for all men are brutal with their first killing. Who was to say what would suffice for the slaying of a Pākehā? It is a new thing, and a madness. His words so probably contained the true explanation of a fact which had aroused the horror and indignation of the whites, that I was silent. "You Pākehā are strange beings," he commented. "There is but one death, though he wear 100 faces. Is it a more beautiful thing that a man should lie screaming with his entrails pierced by your bayonets, than that his skull should be cleft asunder and his face disfigured in the quick death of a Maori axe?" I kept him in conversation, hoping to discover a clue to the reason why Tamihana had taken such pains to intercept me, but though his manner was friendly in the extreme, and he talked freely of the possibilities of the war, he was too wary to drop a hint of the matter immediately in hand. The chief desired to see me. He was not a great distance away. He would be gratified by my ready acceptance of the invitation. I might be at liberty tomorrow, or the next day, or the day after. There was no hurry. All was well with the Thumb and Puhi-Huia and Roma. They remained quietly at Matakiki. He looked at me blankly when I inquired the whereabouts of my fellow traveller. He had understood the Pākehā was journeying alone. Possibly Hone had caught sight of the party, and fearing delay had gone on by another trail. I was not deceived by his glib answers and smooth speech, but I saw that it was useless to question him, and that if any explanation were forthcoming, it must be from Tamihana himself. A tramp of about 2 hours brought us to the banks of the Waikato, where a large canoe, manned by a dozen stalwart natives, was in waiting to transport us across the stream. I judged that it was not one of the usual ferry places from the fact that there were no habitations or cultivations in sight. Indeed, in its mingling of swamp and bush, it was as unlikely a place for a Maori settlement as could be imagined. There were again no familiar faces among the warriors in the canoe, a fact which surprised me at the time, but was afterwards explained by my captor's desire to avoid the possibility of some boyhood's friend and sympathizer providing me with a means of escape. But again there was nothing but good humour and politeness in the treatment I received from this fresh contingent. The canoe made a slanting passage of the river, landing us some half-mile lower down on the opposite bank, and immediately returning by the way it had come. Some leafless willows fringed the bank, probably denoting the house of a settler, or at all events a Maori village. Close at hand, and drawn up beneath them, was a group of 6 horses, ready saddled and in charge of some ragged, bareheaded children. Aporo's eye brightened at the sight of them. "It is well," he said. "It shames me that the pakeha should have travelled so far on foot. Choose now, Koroiti, the horse that pleases you." Footnote: Koroiti, little finger. End of footnote. I made my selection, and picking 4 men from his troop, he gave the rest their dismissal. 2 riders were sent on in front, the leader and I followed, and the remaining 2 brought up the rear. I did not fail to note that before mounting every man renewed the priming of his gun. Indeed, I had no doubt I was intended to observe the action. Our route lay away from the river, a little to the south of westward, and it has remained a puzzle to me to this day why, in the view of our destination, I was not taken down the almost straight reach of the Waikato in the canoe we had just quitted, rather than the more tortuous channel of the Waipa, for which we were evidently heading. They could scarcely have hoped to confuse me in a country the topography of which I knew so well, and I can only suppose that the presence of a body of my own people on the major waterway instigated their choice of the other route. Whether, being now in the neighbourhood of friends, Aporo suspected I might make a bolt for liberty, his manner now took on a sterner and more watchful air. Speech in the ranks of his followers was reproved with a curt word. He himself, save for an occasional low monosyllable in response to some remark of mine, maintained a dogged silence, and if I happened to raise my voice above the key he set me, he would look around with an expression of irritation and answer me not at all. His evident desire for silence gave me an idea, which I at once put into practice by speaking loudly and at length, and disregarding his uneasiness and annoyance. I went on to call his attention to the ancient waiata of the tribe, the staves of which I proceeded to drone out in a voice which I flatter myself could have been heard a mile away. Footnote: Waiata, song. End of footnote. He bore it a while in silence, then laid his hand on my arm. "Little finger," he said, "a wise man is known by his silence, but only death can still the prattling of a fool." "You are afraid to be overheard," I retorted, "but with me that is not a matter for fear. Here I am in the country of my friends." "Sing then, if it please you," he replied, "yet you have more need to fear than to welcome the interference of your friends. The command of Te Waharoa is as the sky that covers all things good and evil." His reference to the chief by the dread name of his father was not without its influence upon me. Throughout my childhood, and until it was in a measure supplanted by the living figure of Te Huata, the great warrior had personified for me all that was most terrible in his race. Memories of the 100 ruthless deeds still lived in men's minds, and found a voice round the charcoal fires, and among them were acts of treachery such as the Matamata massacre, which, once heard, could never be forgotten. Very differently did the tongue of rumour speak of Wiremu Tamihana, yet the blood of the father flowed in the veins of the son, and might yet pulse to a like purpose. There was no mistaking the meaning of my companion. Attempted rescue would only result in instant death for me. Had help actually appeared, it was more than probable I should have thrown caution to the winds. But the woods were silent. Scarcely a bird's note broke the afternoon stillness, and resolutely closing my lips, I spoke no more till with the fall of night we came down on the banks of the Waipa. Towards the end of our journey we had turned aside from the wide horse track or road we had pursued since leaving the Waikato into a narrow trail which could only be followed in single file. 2 horsemen were again sent on in front. The captain of the troop fell in behind me, and so, with the nose of one horse at the heels of another, we pushed through the thick growth, bending beneath the overhanging boughs, which here and there scarcely sufficed for the passage of a horseman below them. Arrived at the stream, the leader bade me dismount and accommodated me with a seat beside him on a fallen log, while the rest of the party gathered together what dry sticks they could find close at hand and lit a small fire on the water's edge. I had no doubt it was intended for a signal, and as I observed that our party was now reduced to 5 individuals, I concluded that one man had been sent on along the track we had quitted to make arrangements for the continuance of our journey. Hitherto it had not occurred to me to doubt the truth of what I had been told, but now, as I reflected on the distance we had already travelled, I began to observe discrepancies in Aporo's story. It was impossible that the man I had seen on the banks of the Purcell could have made and returned from such a journey in the short space of time at his disposal. Tamihana was evidently still some distance away, and it could therefore not be in accordance with any instructions from him that I had been waylaid and captured. "How far have we to go now, friend?" I asked. "About 2 hours," was his answer. "The chief, then, is in Ngaruahia." It would have been an act of courtesy if he had come some little way to meet me. "Perhaps, but he has but this morning returned from the lower Waikato." I feigned to examine his back in the glow of the firelight. "Where are your wings, friend," I asked, "that you are able to travel so far and so fast?" He was only disconcerted for a moment, recovering himself with a laugh. "The order of the chief is not of yesterday," he explained. "We have been looking many days for the return of the little finger." This, save for the unlikelihood of my returning by way of the Purcell river, was plausible enough, but it did not convince me. I could not imagine myself of such importance that every way to Matakiki was patrolled with a view to my capture, and in the alternative I was forced to the conclusion that the scheme, whatever might be its object, had originated with Ihaka and had been prosecuted under his orders. I was, however, shortly to find that a brain more subtle and far more to be dreaded than Ihaka's was at the root of the matter. Nearly an hour lapsed before the chunk of paddles became audible above the crackling of the fire, and a large canoe emerged from the dark shadows up the river. My companion sprang to his feet, and directing 2 of the party to return with the horses, he led me to a seat in the stern of the vessel. Once again I scanned the boat's crew for the sight of a familiar face. Every man, so far as the flickering light enabled me to observe him, was a complete stranger, and doubtless selected for that very reason. At a word of command from Aporo, the paddles dipped the water together, and in a few moments we were engulfed in the blackness of the night. On either hand of me sat a native, the knees of another touched my back, and I had but to put my hand forward a few inches to discover the presence of a fourth. Escape in these circumstances was next door to impossible, and resigning myself to the inevitable, I slid down to the kaiwai, and resting my head against a thwart, was soon fast asleep. Footnote: Kaiwai, a floor of sticks lashed together. End of footnote. It seemed that but a few moments had elapsed when a hand on my shoulder and a voice in my ear called me back to consciousness. The canoe had come to rest. Even in the darkness, and with sleep benumbing my brain, I recognised the meeting place of the waters, the delta at the junction of the Waipa and Waikato rivers. My guess was a correct one. I had been brought to Ngaruawahia, the heart of the rebellious district and the capital of the Maori kingdom. A few men were gathered together on the shore in the bright flare of a torch, but for the rest, village and villagers were lost in the darkness. "Come, little finger," repeated the voice of Aporo. "A few steps will bring you to a more comfortable sleeping place." "There is time for sleep," I responded. "We will go first to the dwelling of the chief." "It is not possible to see the chief tonight," he replied. "Why not?" "It is a time of great trouble," said my captor soothingly. "Tamihana has been called away and will not return till morning." By this time we were ashore, and had advanced to the midst of the group which had stood in silence awaiting our approach. "What is it that you want of me?" I asked, gazing round upon them. "Let the men of Waikato and Ngati Hawa disclose their business, that we may discuss it freely together." They stood looking at one another in silence, as though each called upon another to answer me. "It is a matter for the chief," said my captor at last. "Let the pakeha wait until the morning, and the business will be revealed to him. It is late, and he has travelled far. Also for many hours he has eaten no food. Let these matters be first put right, then we may talk of other things." The suggestion evidently met with the approval of the others, and seeing it was useless to offer any further objection, I allowed myself to be conducted into the village. After proceeding about 200 yards, the party paused in front of a building which appeared to be constructed in European fashion, partly of sawn timber and partly of stout slabs, the latter portion forming an addition against the house wall. There was a small aperture at one end, high up and unglazed, suggesting that the place might be used or intended for a stable. Throwing open the door of the main building, the whole party trooped in. A candle was lit, disclosing to view an extremely dirty room, some 20 feet square, containing a few rough articles of furniture, and a number of sleeping places battened off on the floor along the walls, and filled with the bedding commonly in use among the natives, the tough springy climbing stems of Logodium articulatum. Rugs of gay colours lay folded at the heads of the beds. In the centre of the room was a small table, on which, as though in readiness for the arrival of a guest, was spread a meal of potatoes, kumeras, and steaming fresh water fish, flanked by a pale and heavy-looking loaf. The food spread out on the bare and dirty table offered no temptation even after my day-long fast, and I was on the point of refusing my captor's invitation to partake of it, when the inadvisability of doing so occurred to me. I should be hungry presently, if not now, and why add physical craving to my mental anxiety? The whole party stood in silent attendance on my meal, following every morsel as it touched my lips with a vicarious satisfaction. But as soon as I pushed away my plate, I was reminded that I was not a guest but a prisoner. End of chapter 22, part 1.